Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the disability community.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. And for you folks out there wondering how my name is pronounced, I know it's a common thing. I'm Ioana. I'm part of the accessibility innovation team at Microsoft. And my journey with disability started, I think, 5 years ago, give or take. So I was in my early 30s when I finally got the dyslexia diagnosis. And until then, there were a few things that were happening that I was not necessarily perceiving, but everybody around me was. And I joke that my typos were like Schrodinger's cat, and they still are because I can't see them, but everybody else can. So when I finally got the diagnosis, things were falling into place in terms of like, that's why this happened. And this is why, sometimes I might have a challenge with this or that. Um, so I started reading about dyslexia and then I started reading about other types of disabilities, and I found the world of disability and accessibility to be fascinating. And just very excited about the potential of what technology and accessible design can do for people with disabilities. So that was the moment when I knew I wanted to pivot my career from recruitment to accessibility, because it was close and near and dear to my heart.
Cool. So tell me about your work at Microsoft in the accessibility realm. What's that about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wear two hats, if you will. One, part of our team, we offer an external grant program. So I work with organizations who are interested in really pushing the boundaries of what accessibility can do, through the lens of either AI or assistive technology. So I'm very fortunate to work with amazing external organizations and support them in their endeavors. So that's the first hat. The second hat I wear, and this is a more recent one because of all the technological advancements in AI, especially in the last year. The other thing that I am deeply involved in, as we think of generative AI and large language models or foundation models and the output, how well are those models and how well is this technology at actually representing people with disabilities? We know that there is not much disability representation in the media, and there's not much data when it comes to disability. So are the model inclusive of people with disabilities, or are they pushing biases that we have encountered in society for a long time? So that's the other thing that I am working on.
hmm My next question is, what things do you do in your role that help make things more accessible for people with disabilities? Because you said you work in the realm of AI, so I'm wondering that
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
And by the way, this is going to be a biased answer just because of my work, but know that there's many technologies out there that do similar things. So one example of AI and use case for people with disabilities is Microsoft Copilot. So in the last year, myself and my colleagues who have various different types of disabilities have been using Microsoft Copilot, and mapping out, is there a benefit to disability? Yes, no. And if yes, what is that? So I'll give you my particular example. I mentioned that I'm dyslexic. So using technology similar to Microsoft Copilot enables me to do many things that would have taken hours and effort in minutes. So for example, authoring and writing can be really tricky for me because of the way that I type. I usually have to come back to text and revisit and correct, but being able to author and to edit that real time is very important. It's very easy for me to write. The other example is summarizing. There's usually big body of text that I have to read. It can be a research paper, it can be something else, and I struggle with it. So I can simply inquire regarding that body of text, ask it to summarize it, ask it to pull information regarding a specific, let's say, micro section of it in comparison to the whole document. So these are ways that I'm now working that are completely changing the way I work on a daily basis. And this is a tool that a year ago was not there. Another example for one of my colleagues who is blind, we know that one of the challenges is that the web is not accessible, and there's a lot of pictures and images out there that simply don't have alt text or suitable description. So being able, for example, to drag and drop an image into a, a tool like Microsoft Copilot and ask it to analyze that image provides user also with text description of something that is purely visual. So that's another element for disability in a disability group that can be super beneficial.
Mm-hmm. My next question is like, how do you fine tune, AI to people's needs? Because like people have different types of disabilities. Some might be dyslexic, others might have other types of disabilities or similar ones. So how do you sort of adjust, um, fine tune AI to like people's specific needs?
And there's two things to consider, and I'll go to fine tune in a moment, but let me start more high level. One, even before we get to the model stage, if you're a technology company, if you're producing technology, you're a developer out there, the first thing to consider is the platform accessibility. And what I mean by that, as you're creating a tool, any tool, is it actually accessible? So does your UI work for people with disabilities? Are you doing the right amount of testing to ensure that across the different disability groups, people can access the content? So that's the first one, even before we go to the AI model. Then regarding personalization, that is something that is coming up in the generative AI world, but it's not there. Most of the models today are not personalized per user, right? They will give you general information and they will be contextual as you engage on a particular topic, but they don't necessarily know that you, Laszlo, are interacting with it versus me, Yuan, I'm interacting with it. But I think the future is absolutely personalization, and that's something that will likely come up. But right now, the information is contextual and general. However, as we're thinking of people with disabilities, and one of the things that I was sharing before is how do we ensure that disability representation is inclusive in the output? And there's many ways in terms of how do you ensure that in your models. One is data. It always starts with data. So the more inclusive data is in terms of what the model is built on, the more inclusive the output will be. If it has, a lot of portrayal of people with disabilities, then it will understand the richness and the beauty of disability. If it's not, then probably it will struggle to have a correct portrayal of people with disabilities. So that's one. And then there's other things that organizations or developers can do. Let's say the model was not built with those considerations in mind. People can fine tune their models to your point. They can make sure that they enrich the models with their own data. And also they can do meta prompting in terms of some of the techniques that we have for filtration. And for example, if a model is referring to disability in a way that is either ableist or not inclusive, there's ways for developers and organizations to correct those things and ensure that the way that disability is being portrayed is inclusive. And there's also mitigations from a pure blocking technique perspective. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that somebody is engaging with a model and say, please generate a joke about people with disabilities. Now, the right outcome from our perspective or my perspective would be to say, I'm sorry, I cannot do that because generating jokes about a category of people is not an inclusive behavior. So instead, here are some resources to learn more about disability. So those are all sorts of tools that can be deployed and really depends on the model and its end use. How a technology company or anybody who's building technology would go about it.
Mm-hmm. My last question is, how can AI be used as a catalyst for change? Because I know AI has a lot of great benefits.
I think it can be used for a positive catalyst for change if it's done right. And what I mean by that is one, it has to be inclusive. And it has to be inclusive of the various forms of human identity. And disability is one of them, but there's many others, right? So we must ensure that when the data is brought into these models, it's inclusive. The other thing I would say, I want the people who are working on technology to be diverse. I want people with disabilities to be engaged and working across the whole spectrum, from research to development to testing to being end users and customers. I think the more diverse is the employee experience and employee population of technology companies, the better the outcomes will be. So those are my two main ones in terms of how can we ensure that AI is a tool for good and how can we ensure that everybody has access to it, because we know there is a disability divide. It's important that AI doesn't deepen that, but rather help and provide a tool that can help people with disabilities.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah.